Chapter 1: The Illusion of Luck Throughout History. People have looked at extraordinary achievements and called them luck. A young man becomes the leader of an empire. A small company changes the world. An unknown inventor creates something that transforms humanity. A person standing at the edge of failure suddenly discovers an opportunity that changes everything. From the outside, it looks almost magical. A moment appears, a door opens, fortune arrives. But history hides something important. The moment everyone sees is rarely the moment that created success. Behind every opportunity is usually a person who was willing to step forward when everyone else was waiting. Because fortune has a strange habit, it rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with certainty. It does not come with guarantees. Most opportunities appear disguised as uncertainty, a difficult decision, a dangerous path. A moment where failure seems more likely than success, and this kind creates one of the greatest mysteries of human achievement. Why do some people move forward when others retreat? Why do some people see possibility where others see danger? Why do some individuals seem to attract opportunities while others remain invisible? For thousands of years, humanity has carried a simple phrase: fortune favors the bold. But what does it actually mean? Does fortune truly reward courageous people? Or do bold people simply increase their chances of encountering fortune? To answer this question, we must travel back to ancient Rome, a time when one decision would change the course of Western history. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar stood beside a small river in northern Italy. The river was called the Rubicon. It was not a large river. It was not an impressive natural barrier. But politically, it represented a point of no return. Roman law prohibited generals from bringing their armies into Italy. To cross the Rubicon with soldiers was considered an act of rebellion. It meant choosing conflict with the Roman Senate. It meant risking everything. Caesar had spent years building his reputation. He had conquered vast territories. He had gained the loyalty of his soldiers. But now Rome feared his growing power. The Senate ordered him to return without his army. They expected him to surrender his command, to obey, to step away from power. Caesar faced a decision: return and possibly lose everything he had built, or cross the river and challenge the greatest political system of his time. The safer choice was obvious. Most people would have chosen safety, but Caesar crossed. That single decision began a civil war. It changed Rome forever. The republic that had existed for centuries eventually transformed into the Roman Empire. A small river became a symbol of one of history's greatest turning points. But the important question is not simply what Caesar did. The deeper question is why he acted when others hesitated. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Caesar understood the danger. He understood the consequences. Boldness is not believing that failure is impossible. Boldness is acting when failure is still possible. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. The Wright brothers did not build the first successful airplane because they knew they would succeed. They succeeded because they were willing to continue when failure was almost guaranteed. Steve Jobs did not return to Apple because the future was certain. He returned when the company was close to collapse. Nelson Mandela did not choose reconciliation because revenge was easy. He chose forgiveness because he understood the future required something greater than anger. In each case, people later described the outcome as fortunate, but they often ignore the invisible moments before success: the preparation, the failures, the doubts, the uncertainty. The courage required to act before the result was visible. This reveals a powerful truth about human nature. People often believe luck comes first and courage follows. History suggests the opposite. Courage often comes first. And what people later call luck is sometimes the result of placing yourself in the right position for opportunity to appear. The philosopher Seneca observed that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. The fear of what might happen can become more powerful than what actually happens. This fear controls millions of decisions every day. People remain in situations they dislike because change feels dangerous. They abandon ideas because criticism feels painful. They avoid opportunities because failure threatens their identity. The human brain was designed for survival. For thousands of years, caution protected us. A person who avoided unnecessary danger was more likely to survive. But the modern world rewards a different ability. The ability to recognize opportunity inside uncertainty. The ability to move before complete certainty arrives. the ability to take calculated risks. This does not mean every bold person succeeds. History proves otherwise. Many courageous people failed. Many ambitious people were forgotten. Boldness is not a guarantee of victory. It is a requirement for possibility. Without bold action, many achievements would never have existed. Every invention, every movement, every great transformation began with someone willing to take the first step into uncertainty. The world remembers the victories. But before every victory was a moment when success was invisible. A moment when someone had to decide, should I remain where I am, or should I step into the unknown? This is the hidden foundation behind fortune. Not luck alone, not talent alone, but the willingness to act when the outcome is uncertain. However, this creates another question. If boldness creates opportunity, why are most people still afraid to act? Why does the human mind naturally resist the very uncertainty that can create greatness? To understand that, we must look deeper, not at history, but inside the human mind itself. Chapter 2: The Human Brain and the Fear of Uncertainty. Every great decision in history begins with a moment of uncertainty. A person stands between two worlds, the familiar world they know, and the unknown world they cannot predict. One path offers comfort, the other offers possibility. But possibility comes with a price, risk. And for most human beings, risk creates fear. This creates one of the greatest contradictions of human nature. The same uncertainty that creates opportunity is the same uncertainty that makes people hesitate. The unknown is where discoveries are made, but the unknown is also where fear lives. Why? Because the human brain was not designed first for achievement. It was designed for survival. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors lived in environments where mistakes could be fatal. A person who ignored danger could die. A person who carefully evaluated threats had a greater chance of survival. The cautious person survived. The reckless person disappeared. Over generations, the human brain developed powerful systems designed to protect us. The problem is that the world changed faster than our instincts. Today, the threats are different. The danger is often not a predator waiting in the darkness. It is the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of losing security. Yet the same survival mechanisms remain active. They protect us from danger, but they can also protect us from opportunity. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how humans make decisions. His research revealed something surprising. Human beings do not evaluate gains and losses equally. Losses feel much more painful than equivalent gains feel rewarding. This principle became known as loss aversion. Imagine two people receiving the same opportunity. One sees what can be gained. The other focuses on what can be lost. The opportunity is identical. The information is identical, but the decision becomes completely different. One person sees possibility. The other sees danger. This explains why many people remain trapped in situations they secretly want to escape. A person stays in a career they dislike because leaving feels risky. Someone avoids starting a business because failure feels humiliating. Someone refuses to pursue a dream because they imagine losing more than they imagine gaining. The mind is not always asking, "What could I achieve?" Often it is asking, "What could go wrong?" And this question silently controls millions of lives. But fear of loss is only one part of the story. Another powerful force is what psychologists call the status quo bias. Humans naturally prefer what is familiar, even when the familiar is not good. The known feels safer than the unknown. A painful certainty can feel more comfortable than an uncertain possibility. This explains why people sometimes remain in situations that limit them. The current reality may be uncomfortable, but at least it is predictable. The future is unknown, and the brain interprets the unknown as a threat. This pattern can be seen throughout history. When the Wright brothers experimented with flight, many experts believed powered human flight was impossible. When innovators introduce new technologies, society often doubts them. When leaders propose radical changes, resistance appears. The first reaction to something new is often rejection, not because the idea is always wrong, but because unfamiliar things challenge our sense of safety. There is another force even stronger than personal fear, the fear of standing alone. Humans are social creatures. For most of history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Being rejected by the tribe could mean death. So the human mind developed a powerful desire for acceptance. This instinct remains with us today. People fear criticism. They fear looking foolish. They fear being different. Sometimes people abandon their own judgment simply because everyone around them disagrees. Psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this through his famous conformity experiments. Participants were asked to compare the length of lines. The answer was obvious. Yet many participants gave the wrong answer when the group intentionally gave the wrong response. They knew the group was wrong, but they still followed. This reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. People do not only fear failure, they fear being different. And this explains why bold individuals often appear unusual before they appear successful. Before society celebrates a person who challenges the world, society often questions them. Before people admire the entrepreneur, they doubt the idea. Before people respect the pioneer, they criticize the journey. History has a strange pattern. The person who eventually becomes an example of courage often begins as an example of foolishness. But boldness is not ignoring fear. It is understanding fear. It is recognizing that the brain's desire for safety is not always the same as wisdom. The same instinct that once protected humans from physical danger can now prevent them from pursuing meaningful opportunities. This is why courage is not a natural state. It is a learned discipline. A person becomes bold by repeatedly teaching the mind. The unknown is not always a threat. The possibility of failure does not mean guaranteed disaster. Discomfort does not always mean danger. This is why history's greatest figures were not people without fear. They were people who developed a different relationship with fear. They felt it, they understood it, and they acted anyway. Julius Caesar felt fear before crossing the Rubicon. The Wright brothers felt fear before testing their aircraft. Mandela felt fear before entering a divided South Africa. But fear did not make their decisions for them. They understood something most people never fully learn. Fear is a signal. It is not always a command. And sometimes the greatest opportunities in life exist on the other side of the very thing we are trying hardest to avoid. But understanding fear alone is not enough, because courage is not created only in the mind. It is also created through preparation, knowledge, and competence. The next question becomes even more important. Why do some people develop the confidence to act while others remain trapped by uncertainty? The answer lies in something hidden beneath bold decisions. Preparation. Chapter 3: The Inviolability of Courage. On December 17, 1903, 4 men watched a strange machine rise above the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. For 12 seconds, humanity achieved something it had dreamed about for thousands of years. Human beings had finally flown. To the world, it looked like a miracle. A few bicycle mechanics had achieved what many of the greatest engineers and scientists had failed to accomplish. But what the world saw was only the final moment. It did not see the years before. The countless experiments, the broken machines, the failed designs, the cold mornings spent studying wind, the hundreds of attempts that ended without success. The Wright brothers were not successful because they suddenly became brave. They became brave because they became prepared. This reveals one of the most misunderstood truths about boldness. Bold decisions rarely come from nowhere. They are usually built on a foundation of knowledge, experience, and preparation that remains invisible to everyone watching from the outside. When people look at a successful person making a courageous move, they often see only the decision. They see the entrepreneur launching the company. They see the leader making the difficult choice. They see the inventor revealing the breakthrough. But they do not see the years that created the confidence behind that decision. They see the courage. They do not see the preparation. This is why successful boldness is often mistaken for luck. Because the final action is visible, the foundation beneath it is hidden. Robert Greene explores this idea in his study of mastery. He argues that exceptional achievements are usually built through a long period of learning, observation, and deliberate practice. The world notices the performance. It rarely notices the preparation. The musician performing beautifully on stage appears naturally gifted, but behind that performance are thousands of hours nobody witnessed. The athlete winning the championship appears naturally talented, but behind that victory are years of training when nobody was watching. The entrepreneur making a successful decision appears fearless, but behind that confidence are years of understanding the industry, learning from mistakes, and developing judgment. Preparation changes the meaning of risk. To someone without knowledge, a bold decision can look like gambling. To someone with deep understanding, the same decision can be calculated. The difference between courage and recklessness is often preparation. Consider Admiral Yi Sun-sin during the Battle of Myeongyang in 1597. He faced a Japanese fleet that greatly outnumbered his own. Many people looking only at the numbers would have called his decision impossible. But Yi was not simply brave. He understood the battlefield. He understood the currents. He understood the limitations of the enemy. His courage was built on knowledge. He was not blindly challenging impossible odds. He was using preparation to transform impossible odds into opportunity. This principle appears throughout history. The Wright brothers studied aerodynamics before attempting flight. Steve Jobs spent decades studying technology, design, and human behavior before returning to Apple. Marie Curie spent years conducting difficult experiments before her discoveries changed science. The visible moment of success was only the final chapter of a much longer story. Nassim Nicholas Taleb describes a related idea through the concept of anti-fragility. Some people and systems do not simply survive uncertainty. They become stronger because of it. Every failure, every mistake, every setback becomes information. The prepared person does not experience failure as the end. They experience failure as feedback. This creates a powerful advantage. When uncertainty appears, an unprepared person sees danger. A prepared person sees information. The situation may be the same. The interpretation is different. An interpretation often determines action. This is why confidence is frequently misunderstood. Many people believe confident people act because they believe they cannot fail. But true confidence comes from something deeper. It comes from knowing, I have prepared myself to handle whatever happens. The bold person does not need certainty, they need capability. Because certainty is impossible. Every major decision in life contains unknown elements. Starting a business, changing careers, moving to a new country, creating something new, building a relationship. No one receives a guarantee before taking action. The difference is that prepared people trust their ability to respond. They do not predict every obstacle. They develop themselves to face obstacles. This is also why the greatest opportunities often appear frightening. If an opportunity feels completely safe, it is usually not a major opportunity. Growth requires stepping beyond current ability. But stepping beyond current ability does not mean stepping without preparation. There is a dangerous misunderstanding in modern discussions about courage. People often celebrate the leap. They ignore the training before the leap. They celebrate the risk. They ignore the discipline that made the risk intelligent. They celebrate the victory. They ignore the invisible foundation beneath it. The truth is simple. Boldness without preparation is gambling. Preparation without action is wasted potential. Great achievements require both. A person must build the ability, then have the courage to use it. This is why fortune often appears to favor certain people, not because they are magically lucky, but because they have spent years preparing themselves for opportunities that others are not ready to recognize. When opportunity arrives, many people see uncertainty. The prepared person sees possibility. And this creates another important question. If preparation creates the ability to act, why do some people continue moving forward after failure while others give up? Why do some people become stronger after rejection, loss, and disappointment? The answer reveals another hidden foundation behind boldness. Chapter for the people WHO fail forward. In the winter of 1831, a young man in Illinois lost his job. He was 22 years old. He had no wealth, no powerful connections, no clear path ahead. To many people around him, it was simply another ordinary failure. But this was only the beginning. Over the next decades, this same man would experience business failure, political defeat, personal tragedy, and periods of deep uncertainty. He would lose elections. He would struggle financially. He would face criticism from almost every direction. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and eventually, he would become the president who guided the United States through its greatest internal crisis. But the important question is not how Lincoln succeeded. The important question is, why did repeated failure not destroy him? Because every bold life eventually encounters the same obstacle: reality. The world does not reward ambition without testing it. Every person who attempts something meaningful eventually faces rejection, disappointment, and uncertainty. The difference between people who continue and people who stop is often not talent. It is their relationship with failure. Most people see failure as a verdict, a final judgment, a statement about who they are. They think, I failed, therefore I am not capable. But some people interpret failure differently. They see it as information, a lesson, a correction, a necessary part of the process. This difference changes everything. Psychologist Carol Dweck studied this idea through her research on mindset. She discovered that people often fall into two different ways of viewing ability. A fixed mindset sees ability as something permanent. If you fail, it means you lack the ability. A growth mindset sees ability as something that develops. If you fail, it means there is something to learn. The event is the same, the interpretation is different, and the interpretation determines whether a person continues. History is filled with people who succeeded because they refused to allow failure to define them. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times while developing practical electric lighting. The Wright brothers crashed aircraft repeatedly before achieving controlled flight. Steve Jobs was removed from the company he created before returning years later to rebuild it. Failure was not an interruption in their stories. Failure was part of their stories. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings about successful people. People often imagine a straight path. A person has an idea, they work hard, they succeed. But real human progress rarely follows a straight line. It is usually a path filled with wrong decisions, unexpected obstacles, and moments where giving up appears reasonable. The difference is that some people continue long enough for opportunity to find them. Nassim Nicholas Taleb describes this through the concept of anti-fragility. Some things do not merely survive pressure. They improve because of pressure. A muscle becomes stronger because it experiences resistance. A person can become stronger because they experience difficulty. Failure can reveal weaknesses. Pain can reveal priorities. Obstacles can develop abilities that comfort never would. This does not mean suffering is automatically valuable. Pain alone does not create greatness. The lesson comes from how a person responds to pain. Viktor Frankl understood this better than almost anyone. During the Second World War, Frankl survived the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. He experienced suffering that most people cannot imagine. Yet from that experience, he developed one of the deepest ideas in psychology. He argued that even when people cannot control their circumstances, they still retain the ability to choose their response. That inner freedom becomes one of the most powerful sources of human resilience. Frankl did not suggest suffering is good. He suggested that humans can create meaning, even in suffering, and meaning gives people the strength to continue. This explains many of history's most remarkable examples of courage. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years imprisoned, yet imprisonment did not destroy his purpose. Honda watched his factories disappear after war and destruction, yet he rebuilt. Abraham Lincoln faced repeated political defeats, yet he continued. The pattern is clear. The bold are not people who experience fewer obstacles. They are people who refuse to allow obstacles to determine the final outcome. But there is another important lesson. Resilience does not mean stubbornly repeating the same action. That is not courage, that is pride. True resilience requires adaptation. A person must be willing to ask, what is this failure teaching me? How must I change? What must I learn? This is where boldness becomes intelligent. A reckless person says, I failed because the world is wrong. A resilient person says, I failed. What can reality teach me? The difference is humility. The greatest achievers throughout history combine two qualities that seem opposite: confidence and humility. Confidence to act, humility to learn. Without confidence, people never begin. Without humility, people never improve. This balance is one of the hidden foundations behind extraordinary achievement. Because the world does not belong to those who never fail. Nobody has that life. The world often belongs to those who fail, learn, adapt, and continue. The person who never risks anything may avoid failure, but they also avoid discovery. They avoid growth. They avoid the possibility of transformation. Every great achievement carries the memory of earlier defeats. The successful entrepreneur remembers the failed business. The great scientist remembers the experiments that did not work. The respected leader remembers the moments of doubt. Those failures become invisible foundations. They create judgment. They create wisdom. They create resilience. This reveals another truth about fortune. Fortune does not only favor the bold, it favors those who can survive long enough for their bold decisions to have a chance. Because opportunity does not always reward the first attempt. Sometimes it rewards the person who remained standing after everyone else walked away. But resilience alone still does not explain everything. Some people survive failure but never create anything meaningful. They endure hardship but never take the next step. So another question remains. What separates people who simply survive uncertainty from those who use uncertainty to create something extraordinary? The answer is one of the oldest forces in human history: vision. Chapter 5, The Power of Vision. In 1899, the Commissioner of the United States Patent Office reportedly believed that almost everything worth inventing had already been discovered. The idea sounds impossible today. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was about to experience electricity, aviation, automobiles, computers, space exploration, and the internet. Yet before these transformations happened, many people believed the future had already been reached. This is one of the great paradoxes of human progress. The future often looks impossible until someone builds it. Every major transformation begins with a person seeing something that does not yet exist, a possibility hidden inside uncertainty, a future that others cannot imagine. This ability is called vision, and vision is one of the invisible foundations behind bold decisions, because nobody takes extraordinary action without first imagining an extraordinary possibility. Before a building exists, an architect sees it in the mind. Before an invention exists, an inventor imagines it. Before a movement changes society, someone first believes change is possible. Vision is the bridge between imagination and action. But vision creates a difficult problem. The person who sees the future often appears unrealistic in the present. History has a pattern. Before people are recognized as visionaries, they are often criticized as dreamers. In the early 2000s, a small group of engineers believed electric vehicles could become the future of transportation. At the time, this idea seemed unrealistic. Electric cars had existed before, but they were slow, expensive, limited in range. Most major automobile companies believed the internal combustion engine would dominate for decades. Then Elon Musk invested heavily in Tesla. Many people considered the decision irrational. The company faced enormous technical and financial challenges. The technology was difficult. The market was uncertain. The possibility of failure was very real. But Musk was not simply betting on a car company. He was betting on a future where transportation would eventually need to change, whether every prediction was correct or not. The important lesson is the psychology behind the decision. Vision allows people to act before society reaches agreement. Without vision, people only move after success becomes obvious. But by then, the greatest opportunities may already belong to someone else. This principle appears throughout history. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007, many critics questioned why people would need a device that combined a phone, music player, and internet browser. The market already had successful phones. Many companies focused on improving existing technology. Jobs focused on changing the relationship between humans and technology. He was not simply improving a product, he was imagining a different future. Apple's success did not come from predicting every detail correctly. It came from understanding human behavior. People did not only want better technology, they wanted technology that felt natural. They wanted simplicity. They wanted connection. Vision is not always seeing the future perfectly. Sometimes it is understanding human needs before they become obvious. This idea connects with Peter Thiel's concept of contrarian thinking. In his book 0 to 1, Thiel argues that great opportunities often exist in places where most people disagree. The important question is not, what is everyone doing? The important question is, what important truth do few people understand? Because if everyone already understands an opportunity, the opportunity is usually no longer hidden. The greatest opportunities often appear strange at first. The airplane, the automobile, the personal computer, the smartphone, the internet. Each changed the world because someone believed in a possibility before it became obvious. But vision is not imagination alone. A person can dream about impossible things without creating anything. The difference between fantasy and vision is action. Vision creates a responsibility. If you believe something can exist, you must begin building toward it. This is why bold people often appear irrational. They are acting according to a future that others cannot yet see. The outside world judges them using today's reality. They are operating according to tomorrow's possibility. Psychologist Albert Bandura studied a related concept called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that your actions can influence outcomes. People with strong self-efficacy are more likely to attempt difficult tasks, not because they believe failure is impossible, but because they believe effort can change the result. This belief creates persistence. Without it, challenges appear permanent. With it, challenges become problems to solve. Vision also connects deeply with Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey. Across cultures, stories repeatedly describe the same pattern. A person begins in an ordinary world. They encounter a challenge. They leave the familiar. They enter uncertainty. They face trials. They return transformed. The hero is not special because they have no fear. The hero becomes special because they answer a call that others ignore. This pattern appears in explorers, entrepreneurs, scientists, and leaders. They all enter unknown territory. However, vision has a dangerous enemy, ego. A person can believe so strongly in their idea that they stop listening to reality. This is where boldness becomes dangerous. True vision requires two abilities, the courage to believe and the humility to adapt. The visionary says, "I believe this future is possible." The arrogant person says, "I cannot be wrong." History rewards the first. History destroys the second. This is why the greatest visionaries combine imagination with discipline. They dream beyond the present, but they remain connected to reality. They test, they learn, they adjust, they improve. They do not simply believe, they build. The hidden lesson is this: most people wait for evidence before believing. Visionary people often believe enough to create the evidence. They do not see the future because they have certainty. They create the future because they are willing to work toward a possibility. And this reveals another invisible foundation behind fortune. Opportunity often belongs to those who can recognize it before everyone else. Because by the time the entire world sees an opportunity, it is no longer an opportunity. It is a competition. But vision alone is not enough. A person can see the future and still fail if they cannot influence others, build relationships, and create support around their ideas. Because no great achievement is created by one person alone. The next question is even deeper. Asterisk, why do some bold individuals attract people, resources, and opportunities while others with great ideas remain invisible? The answer lies in another hidden force behind success. Influence. Chapter 6, The Enviable Network Behind Boldness. In 1961, a young president stood before the world and made a promise. Before the end of the decade, America would send a human being to the moon and return them safely to Earth. His name was John F. Kennedy. At the time, the goal seemed almost impossible. The United States had only recently entered the space race. The technology required did not fully exist. The scientific challenges were enormous. Thousands of problems remained unsolved. To many people, the announcement sounded like a dream rather than a realistic plan. But what happened next reveals an important truth about boldness. Kennedy did not build the moon program alone. He created a vision. But thousands of engineers, scientists, mathematicians, technicians, and workers transformed that vision into reality. The world remembers the astronaut who stepped onto the moon. But behind that single moment stood hundreds of thousands of invisible contributions. This reveals another hidden foundation behind every bold achievement. No great accomplishment is truly individual. Even the most courageous people in history depended on others. They needed teachers who shaped them, mentors who guided them, teams that supported them, partners who believed in the vision, and communities that provided opportunities. The phrase self-made is one of the most misleading ideas in human achievement. People often look at the final result and forget the invisible network that made it possible. The entrepreneur remembers the company they built, but behind that company were employees, customers, investors, advisors, and people who offered opportunities at critical moments. The inventor remembers the discovery, But behind that discovery were teachers, researchers, previous generations of knowledge, and countless people whose work created the foundation. The leader remembers the decision, but behind that decision were people who helped develop the judgment necessary to make it. Boldness may begin with one person, but success almost always requires many. This idea explains why some bold individuals seem to attract opportunity. It is not magic, it is often trust. People are willing to support individuals who demonstrate courage, competence, and commitment. When someone consistently moves toward a meaningful goal, they send a signal. They show seriousness. They show conviction. They show that they are willing to act, and that attracts others. Robert Greene discusses a related principle throughout his writings on power and human nature. People are influenced not only by what someone says, they are influenced by what someone demonstrates. Actions communicate commitment. A person who repeatedly takes meaningful action creates a reputation, and reputation becomes a form of social capital. Consider Abraham Lincoln. Before becoming president, Lincoln was not a powerful aristocrat. He was born into a poor family. He had limited formal education, but over decades he built something more valuable than wealth: trust. Through communication, honesty, and persistence, he developed a reputation that allowed people to believe in him during America's greatest crisis. His leadership was not created in the moment of the Civil War. It was built over a lifetime. The same pattern appears in business. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he did not succeed simply because he had an idea. He needed talented designers, engineers, marketers, and leaders who believed in rebuilding the company. A vision without people remains an idea. A vision with people becomes a movement. This is why boldness has a social dimension. A person may have courage, they may have intelligence, they may have vision, but without relationships, their impact is limited. The world is interconnected. Opportunities often travel through people. A conversation creates a connection. A connection creates an opportunity. An opportunity changes a life. Many people call this luck. But often what they call luck is the result of being connected to the right people at the right time. Malcolm Gladwell explores this idea through the role of hidden advantages in social environments. Success is influenced not only by individual ability but also by circumstances, timing, culture, and networks. A person can have great talent, but if nobody knows their ability exists, their impact may remain hidden. This creates an important lesson. Boldness is not only about stepping forward, it is also about allowing others to see your commitment. Many people hide their ambitions because they fear judgment. They keep their ideas private. They avoid asking for help. They wait until everything is perfect. But great achievements rarely emerge from isolation. They emerge from interaction, from conversations, from collaboration, from people willing to support a vision. However, there is a deeper psychological reason why people avoid building these connections. Many people believe asking for help is a sign of weakness. They want to appear completely independent. But history teaches the opposite. The strongest individuals understood when they needed others. They were not weak because they accepted help. They were wise enough to recognize that no human being sees the complete picture alone. Viktor Frankl wrote about the importance of meaning and responsibility. Human beings discover purpose, not only through what they achieve individually, but also through their relationship with others. Our lives are connected. Our achievements are connected. Our progress is connected. This brings us back to the idea of fortune. People often say that person was lucky. They saw the odd opportunity. They saw the success. They did not see the years spent building trust. They did not see the relationships developed. They did not see the people who helped along the way. They saw the result. They missed the foundation. The hidden law is this: bold people do not create success alone. They create conditions where others want to join them. Courage attracts attention. Competence creates trust. Trust creates cooperation. Cooperation creates possibilities. But there is still another mystery. If courage, preparation, vision, and relationships create opportunity, why do some people with all these qualities still fail? Why do some bold people succeed while others with equal ambition collapse? The answer takes us into one of the most misunderstood aspects of success: timing. Because sometimes the difference between failure and success is not the person. It is the moment in history when they choose to act. Chapter 7: The Invincible Power of Timing. In 1876, a young inventor named Alexander Graham Bell stood before the world and demonstrated a device that would change human communication forever: the telephone. But when Bell first presented his invention, not everyone saw the future. Some people considered it unnecessary. Some believed existing communication methods were already enough. Others simply could not imagine how such a device would transform society. The invention was brilliant, but brilliance alone was not enough. The world had to be ready for it. The technology needed supporting infrastructure. People needed to understand its usefulness. Businesses needed to adopt it. The invention needed the right moment. This reveals another hidden foundation behind fortune. Opportunity is not only about ability, it is also about timing. A person can be prepared. A person can be courageous. A person can have a revolutionary idea. But success often depends on whether the world is ready to receive that idea. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of achievement. When people look at successful individuals, they often focus entirely on personal qualities. They say, they worked harder, they were smarter, they were more determined. These things matter. But history shows another factor operating quietly in the background: the environment, the moment, the conditions, the opportunities available at that time. Malcolm Gladwell explored this idea in his work on success and opportunity. He argued that extraordinary achievement is rarely created by individual effort alone. It also depends on circumstances that allow ability to become visible. A person can possess incredible talent, but talent needs the right environment to flourish. Consider Bill Gates. Many people know the story of Microsoft. They know the ambition, the programming skills, the business decisions, but timing played a critical role. In the 1970s, personal computers were beginning to emerge. The technology was becoming accessible. The market was developing. The world was entering a new digital age. Gates did not create the personal computer revolution alone. He positioned himself at the beginning of a massive transformation. His ability met a historical moment. That combination created extraordinary opportunity. This does not mean successful people simply wait for luck. They prepare before opportunity appears. Timing rewards those who are ready. A person who understands an emerging trend before others can move faster when the moment arrives. A person who has developed skills before demand appears can take advantage when demand grows. Preparation creates the ability to recognize timing. This principle can also be seen in science. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. The discovery happened partly through an unexpected observation. A mold had contaminated one of his bacterial cultures and killed surrounding bacteria. At first, it looked like an accident. But accidents alone do not create breakthroughs. Many people experience unusual events. Few recognize their importance. Fleming had the scientific knowledge to understand what he was seeing. The opportunity existed, but only a prepared mind could recognize it. This idea is captured in a famous principle: chance favors the prepared mind. The event may be random, but recognizing its significance requires preparation. History is filled with examples of people who were too early. Their ideas were correct, their timing was wrong. The technology was not ready. The culture was not ready. The market was not ready. They were not necessarily failures. They were simply ahead of their time. Consider the electric vehicle. Electric cars existed long before Tesla. The idea was not new. The challenge was that battery technology, infrastructure, and consumer expectations were not ready. The same idea that failed in one era became transformative in another. The difference was timing. This teaches an important lesson about boldness. A bold person must understand not only what can be done, but also when can it be done. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Nassim Nicholas Taleb discusses uncertainty and probability in a similar way. The world contains randomness. Unexpected events create winners and losers. But people who position themselves intelligently increase their chances of benefiting when uncertainty arrives. They create exposure to positive possibilities. They do not control fortune. They create conditions where fortune can find them. This explains why some people appear lucky. They are often standing where opportunity is most likely to appear. They develop skills before demand rises. They build relationships before opportunities emerge. They study changes before society notices them. Then, when history shifts, they are ready. But timing also teaches humility. A person can do everything right and still fail. A brilliant inventor can arrive too early. A great company can enter a market before customers understand the product. A talented individual can live in a time when their contribution is ignored. Success is not only personal effort, it is the interaction between effort and circumstance. This does not reduce human achievement. It makes it more realistic. The goal is not to control every variable. That is impossible. The goal is to increase the number of opportunities available. More attempts, more connections, more learning, more preparation, more chances for fortune to appear. This brings us back to the original phrase, fortune favors the bold. Perhaps fortune does not simply reward courage. Perhaps it rewards those who are courageous enough to place themselves where opportunity exists. The bold person does not wait for the perfect moment. They prepare themselves so that when the moment arrives, they can recognize it. But there is still a final question. If timing, preparation, courage, and opportunity all matter, how can an ordinary person apply this wisdom today? How does someone living a normal life become more bold without becoming reckless? The answer requires turning history into practice, because the purpose of understanding the past is not simply to admire great people, it is to transform how we live. Chapter 8: The Courage Blueprint. In 1955, a young man sat inside a hospital room in London. He had been diagnosed with a rare disease that affected his muscles. Doctors told him that his physical abilities would continue to decline. For many people, such news would have been the end of their ambitions. The future would appear limited. The possibilities would seem smaller. But this man made a different decision. He decided that his physical limitations would not determine the size of his mind. His name was Stephen Hawking. Over the following decades, he became one of the world's most respected theoretical physicists. His body became weaker, but his curiosity became stronger. His circumstances became more difficult, but his purpose became more powerful. His story reveals something important about courage. Courage is not created when life becomes easy. Courage is created when a person decides that difficulty will not control their future. Many people misunderstand courage. They imagine a fearless person, someone who feels no anxiety, someone who never doubts themselves. But history shows something different. Almost every courageous person experienced fear. The difference was not the absence of fear. The difference was that fear was not given the final decision. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about controlling one's response to difficult circumstances. The Stoics understood that human beings cannot control everything that happens. We cannot control every event. We cannot control other people's opinions. We cannot control uncertainty, but we can control our actions. This is the first principle of courage. Focus your energy on what is within your control. A person who constantly worries about things they cannot change becomes powerless. A person who focuses on what they can influence becomes capable. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means responding intelligently to reality. The bold person does not say, "Nothing bad can happen." The bold person says, "Something difficult may happen, but I can respond." The second principle of courage is starting small. Many people believe courage begins with a dramatic, life-changing decision, but courage is usually developed through smaller actions. Speaking when you are afraid, learning a difficult skill, asking for an opportunity, having an uncomfortable conversation, trying something new. Every small act of courage teaches the brain something important. I can survive uncertainty. Psychologist Albert Bandura demonstrated that confidence grows through experience. People become more confident when they successfully overcome challenges. This creates a cycle. Action creates confidence. Confidence creates greater action. Avoidance does the opposite. Avoidance creates more fear. The third principle of courage is competence. Many people confuse confidence with courage, but confidence without ability can become arrogance. Real courage grows from preparation. A surgeon can make difficult decisions because years of training support those decisions. A pilot can handle emergencies because preparation exists before the crisis. A business owner can make difficult choices because knowledge reduces uncertainty. Competence creates calmness. This is why preparation appeared repeatedly throughout history. The Wright brothers were not simply brave. They understood engineering. Admiral Yi Sun-sin was not simply fearless. He understood strategy. Marie Curie was not simply determined. She understood science. The strongest courage is usually supported by capability. The fourth principle is developing a relationship with failure. A person who sees failure as destruction will always avoid risk. A person who sees failure as information becomes more willing to experiment. This is why entrepreneurs often succeed after multiple failures. They learn faster, they adapt faster, they improve faster. Failure becomes part of the process rather than the end of the process. The fifth principle is finding meaning. Viktor Frankl discovered something profound from his experiences during the Holocaust. People can endure extraordinary difficulty when they have a reason to continue. Meaning gives suffering direction. Without meaning, hardship feels pointless. With meaning, hardship becomes part of a larger journey. This explains why people make extraordinary sacrifices. A parent works through exhaustion because their children matter. A scientist spends decades researching because discovery matters. A leader accepts criticism because a greater mission matters. Purpose gives courage strength. The sixth principle is calculated risk. Boldness does not mean saying yes to everything. A wise person understands that every decision has consequences. Nassim Nicholas Taleb teaches that we should expose ourselves to uncertainty intelligently. The goal is not to eliminate risk. That is impossible. The goal is to create situations where the potential benefit is worth the possible loss. A person starting a business does not need to destroy their entire life immediately. They can learn, test, build skills, create connections, take smaller risks before larger ones. Boldness grows through intelligent exposure. The final principle is accepting that courage often feels uncomfortable. Many people wait for fear to disappear before acting, but fear rarely disappears completely. The courageous person acts while fear is still present. They understand something important. The feeling of fear is not evidence that you should stop. Sometimes fear is evidence that you are approaching something meaningful. The world often celebrates the final result, the successful company, the scientific discovery, the achievement. But behind every achievement was a person who repeatedly chose discomfort over comfort. They chose learning over ignorance, action over hesitation, growth over safety. This is why courage is not something a person either has or does not have. It is built. Every decision is a vote for the person you are becoming. Every time you act despite fear, courage becomes easier. Every time you avoid meaningful action, fear becomes stronger. The question is not, am I a courageous person? The better question is, what courageous action can I take today? Because courage is not created in one heroic moment. It is created through thousands of small decisions. And eventually, those small decisions prepare a person for the moments that history remembers. But there is still one final mystery. After everything we have discovered, after studying leaders, inventors, entrepreneurs, and ordinary people, what is the deepest truth behind fortune? Why do some people continue moving forward even when the odds are against them? The answer brings us to the final lesson, the relationship between courage, uncertainty, and the meaning of a human life. Chapter 9, the final truth about fortune. Throughout history, human beings have searched for the secret behind extraordinary achievement. Why do some people rise when circumstances seem impossible? Why do some individuals create change while others remain trapped by uncertainty? Why do certain moments become turning points in history? For centuries, people have used one simple phrase to explain it. Fortune favors the bold. But after examining the lives of leaders, explorers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and ordinary people who changed history, we discover something deeper. Fortune does not simply reward courage. It rewards a particular kind of courage. The courage that is prepared. The courage that learns. The courage that adapts. The courage that understands reality. Because history is filled with bold people who failed. There were explorers who disappeared. Generals who lost battles. Entrepreneurs who went bankrupt, inventors whose ideas were forgotten. Boldness alone is not enough. A person can be brave and still make terrible decisions. A person can be confident and still misunderstand reality. A person can take a risk and still lose everything. So what separates the bold people who transform the world from those who simply gamble? The answer is wisdom. The ancient Stoics understood this distinction. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful people in the world. He was emperor of Rome. He commanded armies. He possessed wealth and authority. Yet his writings focused not on controlling the world, but on controlling himself. Because true power does not begin with controlling circumstances. It begins with mastering your response to circumstances. The bold person understands something important. The world will never become completely predictable. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be risk. There will always be events beyond human control. The goal is not to remove uncertainty. The goal is to become capable within uncertainty. This is why Viktor Frankl's ideas remain so powerful. Frankl experienced one of the darkest periods in human history. He lost his freedom. He lost his family. He suffered unimaginable conditions. Yet he discovered that even when everything external is taken away, humans still possess one final freedom: the ability to choose their response. This idea changes how we understand courage. Courage is not simply pursuing success. Courage is the ability to maintain purpose when circumstances become difficult. The greatest people in history were not always the strongest. They were often the people who continued when continuation became difficult. Lincoln continued after political defeats. Mandela continued after decades of imprisonment. Honda continued after destruction. The Wright brothers continued after failure. Shackleton continued after his original mission collapsed. Their greatness was not created because life was easier for them. Their greatness was created because difficulty did not remove their purpose. Nassim Nicholas Taleb teaches that uncertainty is not always the enemy. Sometimes uncertainty creates opportunity. The person who avoids every risk may protect themselves from failure, but they also protect themselves from possibility. A life without uncertainty may be comfortable, but it is unlikely to be extraordinary. Every meaningful achievement requires entering territory that has not yet been mastered. The entrepreneur creates a company before knowing exactly how it will succeed. The scientist investigates questions before knowing the answers. The explorer enters places that have never been mapped. The leader makes decisions before the outcome is guaranteed. The unknown is where the future is created. But there is another important lesson. Boldness is not about proving yourself to others. Many people take risks because they want recognition. They want to appear successful. They want approval. But the deepest form of courage comes from something different, meaning. A person who knows why they are acting can endure difficulties that would destroy someone seeking only recognition. This is why purpose matters. Without purpose, risk feels like suffering. With purpose, risk becomes sacrifice. Robert Greene often explores the relationship between ambition and human behavior. One of the greatest dangers for ambitious people is allowing ego to control their decisions. The ego wants to be seen as successful. Wisdom wants to actually create something valuable. The bold person does not ask, "How can I prove myself?" They ask, "What is worth building? What problem is worth solving? What responsibility is worth accepting?" After studying history, psychology, philosophy, and human behavior, we can now understand the phrase differently. Fortune does not favor those who simply jump. It favors those who prepare themselves to recognize opportunity. It favors those who act when others hesitate. It favors those who can survive failure. It favors those who remain humble enough to learn. It favors those who understand that courage without wisdom is dangerous. The world often sees success as a single moment. The business that succeeds, the invention that changes society, the person who becomes famous. But every visible success rests on invisible decisions. Thousands of moments when someone chose discipline instead of comfort, learning instead of ignorance, action instead of hesitation, responsibility instead of excuses. This is why two people can face the same opportunity and experience completely different outcomes. One person sees uncertainty and retreats. Another sees uncertainty and prepares. One person waits for confidence before acting. Another acts and develops confidence through experience. One person waits for fortune. Another creates the conditions where fortune can appear. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about luck is that it arrives randomly. Sometimes it does, but often what appears to be luck is the result of preparation meeting opportunity. The person who has developed skills notices opportunities others ignore. The person who has built relationships receives opportunities others never see. The person who has developed courage accepts opportunities others reject. From the outside, it looks like fortune. From the inside, it looks like years of preparation. So does fortune favor the bold? The answer is yes, but not the reckless, not the arrogant, not those who confuse confidence with wisdom. Fortune favors those who have the courage to act, the intelligence to prepare, the humility to learn, and the resilience to continue. Because courage creates possibility. Preparation creates capability, wisdom creates direction, and persistence gives fortune time to appear. But one final question remains. If history teaches us that boldness creates opportunities, what does this mean for our own lives? Because the greatest lesson of history is not simply understanding what great people did. It is recognizing that every person eventually reaches their own moment of decision, a moment where comfort and possibility stand on opposite sides. A moment where the future depends on whether they move forward or remain where they are. And that moment is where the final lesson begins. Chapter 10, Your Own Rubicon. Every person eventually reaches a moment that looks different from the outside, but feels the same from within. A decision, a crossroads, a point where the future depends on what happens next. For Julius Caesar, it was a small river called the Rubicon. For the Wright brothers, it was a fragile aircraft sitting on a beach in North Carolina. For Steve Jobs, it was returning to a company that many believed was already finished. For Nelson Mandela, it was choosing forgiveness after decades of suffering. For Rosa Parks, it was remaining seated when society expected her to stand. The locations were different. The circumstances were different, but the human experience was the same. A moment arrives when a person must decide. Do I remain with what is familiar, or do I move toward what is possible? Most people imagine that the biggest decisions in life are obvious. They imagine a dramatic moment, a perfect opportunity, a clear sign, but history rarely works that way. The most important decisions often appear ordinary. A conversation, a small step, a difficult choice, a risk nobody else understands. At the moment they happen, they rarely look important. Only later do we understand their significance. This is one of the greatest illusions about success. We look backward and see a clear path. We see the successful company, the completed invention, the transformed life. But we forget that the person who created it was once standing in uncertainty. They did not know the ending. They only knew the next step. The human mind wants certainty before action. It wants guarantees. It wants proof. It wants to know, will this work? Will I succeed? Will people support me? But history teaches a difficult lesson. The greatest opportunities rarely come with certainty attached. The person who waits for complete confidence may wait forever. This does not mean acting without thinking. It does not mean ignoring danger. It does not mean believing every dream will come true. The lessons of history are more sophisticated. Prepare deeply, understand the risks, learn continuously, listen carefully, but eventually act, because there is another danger besides failure: regret. Many people are not destroyed by the risks they took. They are haunted by the opportunities they refused, the business they never started, the skill they never learned, the conversation they never had, the idea they never pursued, the life they never attempted. Seneca once wrote about the tragedy of postponing life. Human beings often behave as though they have unlimited time. They delay, they wait, they convince themselves that someday will be better. But someday is not a place. It is a word people use when they are afraid to begin. The bold person understands something important. The perfect moment rarely arrives. You create momentum by moving. You discover opportunities by searching. You develop confidence by acting. You become prepared by entering the process. The world does not need everyone to become a conqueror, billionaire, or famous inventor. Boldness is not about becoming extraordinary in the eyes of others. It is about refusing to live below your own potential. For one person, boldness may mean starting a company. For another, it may mean returning to education. For another, it may mean leaving a harmful environment. For another, it may mean finally speaking the truth. The form changes. The principle remains. A meaningful life requires movement. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson from all the stories we have explored. The people we admire were not different because they had no fear. They were different because they refused to allow fear to become their master. They understood that uncertainty is not the opposite of opportunity. Often, it is the beginning of opportunity. The farmer plants seeds without seeing the harvest. The scientist experiments without knowing the answer. The entrepreneur builds without knowing the outcome. The explorer travels without knowing everything ahead. Every meaningful achievement begins with a step into the unknown. So perhaps the phrase should not simply be, "Fortune favors the bold." Perhaps the deeper truth is, fortune favors those who prepare themselves, step forward despite uncertainty, and remain persistent long enough for opportunity to recognize them. Because luck alone is not enough. Talent alone is not enough. Knowledge alone is not enough. At some point, every person must act. History is filled with people who stood at their own Rubicon. Some crossed, some turned back. The difference between them was not always intelligence, not always resources, not always opportunity. Often it was a decision, a choice to move forward when the outcome was unknown. The question is not whether fear will appear. It will. The question is not whether uncertainty will exist. It will. The question is, when your moment arrives, when life places you before your own river, will you remain on the familiar shore, or will you have the courage to cross? Because every great journey begins the same way, with one person facing uncertainty, taking one step, and discovering that sometimes fortune was never waiting at the destination. Fortune was created by the courage to begin.